Well, welcome. I think I am live and recording on Zoom and Facebook Live. Thank you for being here. This is a free webinar. The date is Wednesday, August 28th. It is 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I'm sharing this free webinar on permaculture approaches to water and garden resilience, really sharing some very, very simple, basic stuff uh, to show and reflect some of the value that will be shared in the Level Up Permaculture course that starts September 4th, 2024. I'm sharing this for people to learn something, to take it and run with it. And I'm inviting with this is an invitation to come to the Level Up Permaculture course. It is an online course. It has a free version. So you can take it for free. Anybody can take it for free. And anybody can level up at any time to take a paid version. There's a donation base for starting at $17 for people that register before September 4th. And then there's a full course. There's a full course level, full content course level. There's a design certification level. So there's a free version where people can watch every single presentation I do on every single topic from a traditional permaculture design certification course. Then anyone can make the decision to hop on and get involved further. So today I'm just sharing some of the things that myself and my partner Anna Maria from Sun and Bloom Farms, and possibly some other educators from our network, past graduates, will be expanding on and sharing at a deeper level. So with that said, I wanted to make sure that I am live on Facebook. I think something happened here. I don't think I'm live anymore. Yes, I am. So I apologize for the difficulties. Oh, yes, I am. Okay. So I am just going to share lightly about permaculture approaches to water and garden resilience, things that we would do with permaculture design. So before anything, before moving in these two, I'm gonna do my best to keep this as short as possible, just to get like good, short, straight to the point value. I just wanted to say that before making any kind of decisions with permaculture, any kinds of decisions to related to anything related to water, for example, but also to the garden, to where to plant plants, where to put the garden, what to do in the garden. Same with water. Where would we want to collect rainwater from? Where would we want to put, let's say, rain tanks or ponds or personal lakes? Some people have such big ponds, you can possibly even call them lakes. Where to put bioswales. I know that a lot of people that are interested in permaculture and have heard about permaculture and have been kind of like digging in it are familiar with some of these concepts. Before making any of those decisions where to put them, we want to make sure that we look deeply at and holistically at the context, first of all, of the people that we are designing for, and their future, including for yourself. If you're designing for yourself, you got to really look and go through a holistic context analysis and come to some conclusions of where you are, or where the client, the person you're designing for, is in their multiple forms of capital, and what are you, if you're designing for yourself, or them if you're designing for somebody else, what are you or they, um, what are they willing to commit to achieve their vision, mission, and goals for that specific landscape. Again, as I said before, permaculture design can be applied to business plans, it could be applied to institutions, but in general, it is applied to landscape design, to transforming landscapes. So before making any decisions, before saying we're going to put a pond uh, on our property um, next year, right away, we need water. We need to really do a good analysis of the personal context, a holistic, um, uh, a holistic context analysis, and then a holistic context analysis of the region where the project is taking life, and then a holistic context analysis, really, of the place itself where we are designing. So very important. That's why in this course, the way I am teaching it, I'm taking these, I'm presenting these 10 steps as the permaculture design process, and the first 6 are all about analyzing the context, okay, the holistic context, before making any kinds of decisions. So with that said, let me just share some very basic information on, after we look, how do we look at a landscape, first of all, when it comes to water, and what kind of decisions could be made. So first of all, to the left here, I just wanted to say that context matter, right? When we want to harvest rainwater, permaculture promotes this idea of harvesting, and not only promotes, but it teaches how to harvest rain and really use it for a plant and food abundance on the landscape that we would be designing with permaculture. So if you've ever seen any videos, or you ever kind of came across some of these beautiful projects, for example, that Jeff Lawton did in the desert, where you could see some pictures of before and after, just using available rain of the area and making some changes to the landscape with permaculture approaches. You could see a picture in the future showing a completely different landscape. And you would say, how come they're so different? In the past, it rained the same, but the place was dry, nothing was growing. And now, it rains the same amount of water, but it's thriving. And that's because we could definitely do some things to make sure that we capture that rain and we use it properly, and we're not letting it run off the surface. So the first thing that you would do is that you would start with calculating how much water flows and runs off the land that you would be designing. And that calculation uses a very simple formula that is the starting point, and this formula has many tweaks and many added elements to it, and the results of this formula can be used to do so many other calculations, like calculating the sizes of basin and berms, aka bioswales, of ponds, to understand how much water they can capture, to maybe decide how to size them, to catch more or less of the water that's moving through the landscape. So it's a very simple calculation to start with. where you multiply the catchment area in square feet. We're in the United States here, but it can also be done in the metric. The metric has one different number, a coefficient there that's a little bit different. But in square feet here, in the United States measurements here, we would be multiplying the catchment area in square feet with the rain quantity in feet, not in inches. And the rain quantity we can calculate, for example, for 1 inch of rain, just to kind of like get an understanding of that. And I do have a quick reference on the right corner of the screen here. But the rain quantity can also be for the full year. So let's say, a few places where I have designed before. So I've designed in Southern California, coastal Southern California, and Santiago, Chile, which is very, very well off the coast, towards the coast from Santiago, Chile. There are two areas that are very, very similar. Both had actually the same amount of average rainfall per year. So we can calculate how much water is falling on the landscape and how much is running off and how much we can potentially catch, right? So you'll be multiplying the catchment area in square feet by rain quantity in feet by this beautiful number, 7.48 gallons per cubic feet. So I've said this before, I've heard so much about this. This is basically how many gallons fit exactly in the cubic foot. That's what this 7.48 gallons per cubic foot number is, that we're multiplying the catchment area with the rain quantity. And then we can multiply that by a runoff coefficient to understand what our catchment potential is, which means how much water is running off the surface that is hitting. It could be a roof. So the runoff coefficient would be something like 1. Sometimes some roofs have a lower runoff coefficient. So that runoff coefficient number 1 means that all the water that's hitting that surface is basically running off. Problem here. If it was soil, depending on the type of soil, depending on the type of landscape that it falls on, that runoff coefficient can be different. You can only imagine that sand versus clay, for example, would change the runoff coefficient. So clay would be closer to 1, right? Because the water hits the clay, some of that water is gonna saturate and go into that clay, but a lot of it is going to run off once the soil gets saturated. But in in sand, you can already see that the water will seep and go inside of the sand before even that sand gets saturated, and you can start seeing some runoff. So the number is closer to the opposite side, more towards the 0.1. And then of course there's different soil in between. This runoff coefficient is pretty exciting to understand, the catchment potential. Sometimes it's really fun to do the calculation just to understand how much water rains on a specific property. I've done this so many times with clients and with students, and everybody gets very excited to understand how much water basically falls on a specific piece of land. So I'm going to pull out my calculator really quick here to give you really a number. I know you can't see it on the screen, but I'm just going to give you that number. So for example, an acre, we're just going to say 43,000 square feet multiplied. We are going to say, let's just calculate for 1 inch of rain. So for example, where I'm at here at Sun and Bloom Farms in Missouri, rains about 43 inches of rain per year. I have to check that because I've been doing some design in different places of the tropics right now. So hopefully I don't have that number 43 in my head right now. I can actually search really easily on the internet how many inches of rain on a regular, but I'm just going to calculate for 1 inch of rain. So that 1 inch of rain in feet would be 1 divided by 12, right? So I'm going to multiply it by 1 divided by 12. And then I'm going to multiply that with 7.48. And then I am going to have the runoff coefficient for my land here. It's a combination of clay and gravel and some silt with a lot of vegetation on it. So it has a really good absorption rate, but it definitely gets saturated at one point and there is runoff coming up. And because a lot of the events, a lot of the rain events are very very large. We have a lot of like 2-inch events, for example, all at once. So we have floods here because all of that rain, the soil cannot absorb that fast. But I'm just doing it for this inch, and I'm going to put the runoff coefficient here at a 0.5. So I'm going to multiply this with a 0.5 basically. So just on that 1 inch of rain, and I think I might have done it incorrectly, but I will check myself and I'll make sure that I'll put it in a comment or something. It says that just for that 1 inch of rain, I would get 13,000 on this entire well, not the entire property, but just on 1 acre, 13,000 this would be, see, 13,000 gallons. My apologies. So we have a bunch of calculations that we made very simple. We learned that it's about 13,000 gallons of water just for 1 inch for every acre. And the coolest thing to do to kind of like get into perspective how much water this is, how much water falls just in 1 inch event, I would divide this by the amount of gallons a decent shower would take, let's say, right? So, you know, a lot of these shower heads these days are 2 gallons per minute. And if I was to divide it by, 2 gallons per minute, and you take like a hefty shower of 10 minutes, that's 20 gallons. I don't take like showers longer than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is a pretty long shower. But let's say it's a 20 gallon shower. So I'm going to do that. The 13,000 divided by 20. So that would be 670 showers. That means that I can take close to 2 showers a day if I wanted to with all this water, if I actually captured all this water from 1 inch of rain on just 1 acre of the land here. So that's pretty interesting to make some of these calculations. People get very excited to understand how much of that water. I have a quick reference here that just shows that 1 inch of rain on a roof size that's 1,000 square feet is approximately 550 gallons that you can collect in a rain tank. If it's a 2,000 square foot roof, you could collect up to 1,100 gallons. So we're going through a context analysis. We get to a point where we can actually look at the water. We calculate how much water flows and runs off the surface of the property, the land that we're working with. We can look at the different roofs, right? Because those will have a specific runoff coefficient. We can look at different parts of the property. Doesn't matter if there's a slope or not. The square footage would basically be the same because the water is hitting the soil in the same way. But there could be different parts of the property that may absorb water differently than others and have a different type of runoff coefficient. So maybe sometimes we can do like an average. Maybe we want to know in a specific place how much water is running. So if we wanted to, let's say in a specific area, we say this is where we might be putting, the pond, or we might be putting bioswales, or we might be doing rips in the soil to have kind of like a key line approach to letting the water sink inside of the soil. We can make calculations to see, the area, the catchment area from its highest points towards these towards these different things that we would want to put in their way to see how much water would be rushing towards, let's say, this pond. So of course, there's all kinds of other decisions to make, where to place the pond itself, but it's definitely important to understand how much water is going to go towards it and what kind of capacity can we build it. How much space how big is the pond going to be able to be, considering the landscape and the space that we have in the landscape, and also how much money we could spend on a pond, not just to build it, but also to maintain it, because ponds definitely need maintenance, as well as bioswales, as well as keyline rips, for example, and many other kind of like approaches to storing water with the help of soil. So in general, after we calculate the catchment, we calculate catchment potential on different places. The two major places where we can actually store water would be above the ground, or maybe sometimes even in the ground, with tanks, cisterns, and barrels, um, or pools, right? These are basically structures that have, um, are able to contain water. They're a container for water. Usually they're more expensive per gallon stored. They are less permanent because they deteriorate in time with sun, and especially if they're in a place where you have super hot summers and then very cold winters, right? So you can have contraction and expansion, and uh, you can have these structures be not resist the pressure of time, right? Definitely less total rainfall capture because it could be very expensive. And in the Level Up Permaculture course, I will show and exemplify uh, and give some resources to for participants to check out, to see how expensive some of these tanks can become. The bigger they are, the more expensive they become. Sometimes you think that the material will become cheaper and cheaper because you buy more, but it will be more expensive to actually move and transport to the location that you want it. And the same if you were to build something. The cost is not necessarily just in the building, but also in the maintenance through their lifetime. Um, but the water is definitely easier to access for use, right? Because it's in a tank, it's in a cistern, it's in an underground pool. Um, I have seen some of these. I have a really beautiful book here by Art Ludwig that shows all kinds of really beautiful ways to um, collect water in these kind of containers. So with that said, the other place where we would be storing water would be in the soil. Of course, there's the choice to make a pond, but the pond would be more like something like a pool, even though some of the a pond, we would be thinking more of a like a container rather than water being stored in the soil. What we mean by water being stored in the soil is that it penetrates and it infiltrates and it stays in the soil for a specific period of time. And it's definitely when we choose to store water in the soil is less expensive per gallon stored. It is definitely more permanent because the structure we can work with easier, and we can evolve and enhance to and manage, of course, like through management, so that the water stays in the system for longer. Actually, when we store water in the soil, we can recharge aquifers. We can create local hydrology. We can actually create, if we understand deeply the geology of the space, we can fill pockets underground to become aquifers. And we can imagine also when I'm saying this, that an aquifer doesn't necessarily have to be like this space where if you were to touch it, it's just water, but it could be a combination of water in soil or sand or ground material. So we'll be talking a lot about that actually um, in the Level Up Permaculture course. People can, again, watch it for free. You can keep the recording for a small donation. If you register, of course, before the course starts on September 4th, you can take the full content where I'm providing full books. I have a few full books on ponds. I have a full book on key line design and working with water in bioswales and different ways to keep water in the soil. Anyway, back to this. In the soil, we can definitely capture and store more total rainfall. And because we can work with larger surfaces. Again, it's not as expensive as if you had a huge 50,000 gallon tanks, right? We can work and expand and enhance the soil. But it's definitely harder to access for use. So you would have to use it in that space. I will provide the link. I'm not sure if I'm going to necessarily speak about it in the course, but I will provide a link to to one video, and then from there you can watch a few more videos in a playlist with people that actually used this different techniques to store water in the soil to create wells at the bottom of hills. So they used the hill, they did all kinds of techniques, and I'll share about them in the course, where they stored water in the hill itself and grew vegetation on the hill where it didn't grow before, because the water will basically just run off. It will, go as deep as a few inches, and then it would the soil would become hydrophobic, just completely filled with water, and then most of the rainwater would run off and do all kinds of problems to the hill. And after a few modifications to the landscape itself, just using some Zuni bowls, using some rips on and off contour, they were able to put water in the hill. And because the water was holding in the hill so well, and it was traveling underground, it formed a few wells that they tapped into to be able to pump the water back up the hill and use it in other places in the landscape, further down in the landscape. So a lot of beautiful resources are shared in the Level Up Permaculture course. So I hope like this gave you a little bit of value. Again, as a summary, the context definitely matter when we want to make rainwater harvesting solutions and water use approaches. And so analyzing the context is very important. The personal context of the people that will be managing and observing and benefiting from whatever solutions we would put in place for water conservation and catchment and for later use or in the landscape. Context analysis of the region itself, the climate, the weather patterns, but many other things like where would I get the materials to catch the rain, right? Where would I buy the big cisterns and tanks and barrels? And are there any people that are good at repairing these things? Can I find replacements? So when I'm talking about doing a good holistic analysis of the region where we're designing, we want to make sure that we have some of these things in our like resource lists, right? So we can act right away and not have to like do research on the spot if something happens. So I'll discuss more about that when time comes. And then of course the context of the space itself. looking how the water is moving through the landscape, understanding how water moves at different times of the year. When do we get the most water? What kind of soil are we working with? And then deciding on if some of the visions that we originally had to have ponds or to have bioswales or to have, all this vegetation, if the context will that environmental natural context will allow us to do that. Uh, I will do another webinar, possibly tomorrow, Thursday, August 29th. And you probably will find it if you're watching this recorded, about what can happen if we are not working with nature, if we are not designing in harmony with nature, the problems that can happen. And I actually did discuss in my first free webinar when I talked about the importance of holistic context analysis. So I hope you got some value out of this. So let me just go straight to the garden. This is going to be a little bit shorter. And I'm going to use a very simple approach here. In the course, we are going to dive a little bit deeper in this idea of permaculture approaches to a market or kitchen gardens. And when I'm saying that, a market or a kitchen garden in general would be like a vegetable garden, mainly a vegetable garden. Permaculture is inviting us to consider creating a food system for ourselves and put food resilience in our life by planting and maintaining and managing and building as many perennial food systems as possible, which means fruit trees, fruiting shrubs, vines. So systems that keep on giving every year. And then there is a space for annual production also, which is what most people are doing out there and are using concepts from permaculture to make it as resilient as possible. Because annual food production is definitely, in general, and even using regenerative and permaculture approaches, is in general more intense, more work, more resources, and we're trying to bring it as close as possible to what permaculture is inviting us to, the lenses permaculture is inviting us to look through, the lenses of the ethics of earth care, people care, fair share, and then the principles that we're being invited to consider when we are designing food systems, to make them look as much as possible as nature and have the resilience of nature. So when we're working with annual systems, it's more of I don't want to say artificial necessarily, but it's a little bit more detached from that natural way that the environment is growing food, so to say. So very simple here. This is actually an ad that we used for Sun and Bloom Farms to explain to our customers why our crops that they are purchasing, our food that we grow in our gardens, is healthier and way more nutrient dense. I invite you to take a look at one specific organization. I shouldn't say that we've worked with them, but we have tapped into their services, is the Bionutrient Density Institute. They have been looking a lot into the connection between a nutrient density in fruits and vegetables and the agricultural practices that produce that specific fruit or vegetable. And what they found is that conventional traditional agriculture is growing very nutrient low crops, from tomatoes to grapes to potatoes to radishes, which means that people need to eat more quantity in order to get the nutrients that actually something that's grown with regenerative and nutrient density in mind practices, right? Practices that are putting focus on nutrient density. When you're growing a beet, right? You're getting what a beet is supposed to get you. I should have put a picture here, but I do have it in the course where we discuss about that. So traditional farming in general, I call it force feeding plants, and of course using all kinds of chemicals to keep pests away and weeds and so on and so forth. That's adding a layer of replacing nutrients with chemicals that could be harmful. Or are harmful, I should say. We know that there's a lot of studies out there about that. So the other side is this approach, just inspired by permaculture. Of course, there's so many ways I could have said and presented this, and I will in the course with more clarity. But I wanted to just share this in a way that it's easy to communicate and kind of easy to explain. So those practices that would build resilience in the garden, and resilience from many points of view. Resilience because you won't have to grow so many things, because you will grow nutrient dense things in order to get your nutrients for your body and be energetic, and and then work also less. I know some people say that permaculture is like a lazy gardener's dream, but it's not necessarily. It's just a smart gardener's dream. So here are some of the practices that we have here at Sun and Bloom Farms that are inspired by permaculture, that are making our food healthier, with way more nutrient density, and the garden becoming more and more resilient year after year. So one of the number one things that we do is we do minimum to no soil disruption, because that maintains living soil biology. Living soil biology is very important, as you will see as I'm explaining some other steps, to nutrient density, to organic practice growing, to really healthy plants, and to resilient garden, the short and the long term. So we actually do no till whatsoever. We didn't even till the first year that we started the garden. We basically built soil on top of the existing soil. So the only kind of like disruption that we would be doing is if and when we pull things out of the ground. Like, of course, carrots, we're going to have to pull them out of the ground. But sometimes certain plants that we grow, like cabbage, let's say, sometimes we'll just cut the cabbage and let the roots in the ground without pulling them. We just leave them there to decompose and actually be consumed by the soil biology. So number one is that we do minimum to no soil disruption. We're not tilling at all. We never tilled our garden. Number two, we keep the soil covered with plants and mulch to protect soil biology, right? Again, the first thing, minimum to no soil disruption, so that we're not like moving all of that, those amazing microorganisms that are working in the soil there, to make our food taste amazing, and the plants that are producing that food to be super healthy. Number two, we're keeping the soil covered with plants and mulch, plants very densely, so that it protects that soil biology from heat, for example, and from radiation from the sun, but it also protects it from extreme cold, for example, or the very hardcore rain. It as I understand it, it also protects it from um, consumers that might be from above the soil, consuming some of the soil biology that we actually want in there. Number three, we practice very intense plant diversity for biological pest management and nutrient diversity. So nutrient diversity, we get that, right? A lot of plant diversity means that we have nutrient diversity. Certain things have different nutrients that other things have. But a biological pest management means that we do a few things when we have a big diversity in a small space. We confuse pests. So for example, some pests that really love cabbage will not be able to find cabbage so easily because there's so many other plants that are sending signals in the air to call to consumers of that specific plant. So some bugs might be like in the vicinity and they're looking for the brassicas, but they're smelling the onion, and the onion might be a plant that's basically keeping those bugs away, or it might be I don't know, a calendula that Anna Maria, my partner, uses a lot in her medicinal apothecary items. And they might be, what is this? I thought I smelled cabbage, but now I'm smelling something else. Number four, we have a lot of pollinator attraction integrated for multiple reasons. But in this context here is to connect the soil life, the soil biology, with above soil conditions, which means that, and this is a lot to talk about. Anna Maria is a um, master natural uh, beekeeper and pollinator steward. So she knows a lot and practices a lot of pollinator stewardship. She teaches a very beautiful natural beekeeping and pollinator stewardship apprenticeship. It will be available online at one point, but right now she's doing it mostly in person. But the idea here is that the pollinators being able to be in the environment, they have specific type of understanding of the environment. They're able to sense changes. They are able to actually predict seasons and changes in the seasons. It's a deep conversation to have here. Anna Maria's working on communicating that in simpler ways. But it's really beautiful that a lot of the people come do apprenticeships with her. They get to learn that really deeply. There's a lot of information, for example, from Paul Stamets about that. Paul Stamets is somebody that's working with fungi and with mushrooms and very, very dedicated to the bees also, and had a lot of amazing discoveries on the connection between bees and fungi, for example. And there's so many more, so much more research out there about the connection between pollinators and the life in the soil. So I'm not going to go deeper into that. We do have a really beautiful section in our course about that with some research-based information about that. But the pollinator attraction inside of the garden makes sense, right? We need pollination. A lot of the plants that we grow, annual plants, need pollination, from cucumbers to squashes to peas and beans, and different type of plants do so much better when there's pollination. So I'll leave that there, but we do integrate that, and we have seen greater results when we integrate flowers, basically flower rows in our vegetable rows. We do see an increase in production in our vegetable production, and of course in our fruit tree and berry production too. Number five, we use farm-made biofertilizers and biostimulants to awaken and feed the soil life. So 99% of the things that we use to fertilize our gardens are all made with things from the farm itself. Um, Biofertilizers and biostimulants from the forest, but it could also be from our livestock, or a lot of the compost that we do from the garden itself. We talk deeply about that and provide a lot of information and a lot of recipes on how to make that happen. A lot of information coming from Korean natural farming, from these beautiful amazing approaches of fermenting different type of plant materials to use them as fertilizers in the garden. So we talk about that deeply in the course. Number six, we do livestock integration to maintain biofertility, and we do that in multiple ways. First of all, by using, and excuse me for that, by using animal manures in our compost. Animal manures in our compost, but also integrating um, animals to do some pest management at the end of the season, and even do some weed management. So, for example, when our garden is resting in the fall, we actually have some parts of the garden that are already resting, and it's only August 28th. We're gonna put some cover crop, but some parts are just resting without any cover crop, without any kind of production. We're looking at different things with that, but sometimes in certain parts of the garden, we do bring chickens, for example, especially around the areas where we know a lot of beetles might have left eggs for larvae, and of course, we don't want a lot of those grubs early in the season to eat our roots next year, and we don't want those um, beetles to be in abundance in our garden either. So the chickens are really good at scratching around and finding them. And especially in our greenhouse, we do that. And of course, they also leave the manure behind, natural manure that we let sit, and then we basically use cover crops, and that gets integrated really well into the soil. We use heirloom and open pollinated seeds only because we want ancestrally bioevolved nutrient potency. So heirloom plants provide, and we've seen provide so much more nutrient density. There are a lot of nutrients out there and forms of nutrients out there that have not been available for quite a long time on the market, because most of the crops, most of some specific crops have only been GMOs and or hybrids. But heirlooms can bring some very beautiful old nutrients that we haven't had in our diet, and we need to maintain those. So that's why we're doing this. We also make sure that we are in the garden as much as possible and that we connect with the garden. There's also a lot of research that the soil organisms and plants are connecting with people when people are present. And we're discovering that, you know, we're being invited to be grounded sometimes, take our shoes off and be grounded with the soil. Well, that's like a really amazing bioenergetical connection with the soil. And we're looking at it, we're studying it, we're trying to understand as much as possible. We are observing and taking a lot of notes here at Sun and Bloom Farms. But what we're observing is that, and that's why I was telling you that we were working with a Bionutrient Density Institute to figure some of these things out and be able to measure. We don't know exactly. This is why we're doing this research to understand a little bit better. Is the garden really responding to the type of nutrients that we need if we are connecting with a garden? And there's many different ways also to connect with a garden, but we'll talk about those in the course, some of the ways that we are connecting with the garden. We want to make sure that we have living roots maintained at all times in the garden, because living roots also support and increase soil biology. The soil biology that's doing all the work in the soil to grow our plants healthy, because we are not adding chemical fertilizers. But back to the living roots, what that means is that many times after we harvest certain crops, we would be having one like in the same row, we would be having another crop that we seeded while the one we just harvested was large and it was just starting. And once we harvested, the small seeds are starting to come to the surface and start taking over the row. Or we use cover crops. So it could be one crop after another, or it could be a crop and then a cover crop. So when we have living roots in the soil, we make the environment basically really good and inviting and supporting of soil biology, all kinds of microorganisms that are feeding on these roots and breaking down and making nutrients available in the soil. And of course, like our point here, point number 10, we're protecting and enhancing soil biology to form symbiosis with plants, the plants that we're growing, because soil biology mines for nutrients in soil and feeds plants in the most optimal ways. So these are kind of the permaculture practices of treating soil in ways that it helps it grow really healthy and nutrient dense crops. And we will be talking about these approaches in different contexts during the course, and for different purposes also, and really specific things, really specific approaches. So for example, number 3, intense plant diversity. So what kind of diversity, what kind of plants are we doing companion planting with? Livestock integration, how does that look like? When are we integrating the animals and what animals? We've been integrating goats also into the garden. So we'll be discussing in detail about that. And with that said, I hope you got some value from this short webinar. And I'm inviting you to come and join the Level Up Permaculture course, which is a live online permaculture design course that you can even take for free. I highly recommend you take it at least at the donation level so that you can have access to the recordings and watch them anytime. You can take screenshots of the presentations, even though I will be inviting you not to do that. Or get it at a higher level where you can actually have the presentation and look at it in the PDF format, and a lot more resources to expand on the concepts that we're bringing to the table. Thank you very much for being here. I did make it a little bit longer than I thought I would. Enjoy and level up with permaculture. I'll see you soon. Find the permaculture course at Sun and Bloom Farms. If you search Level Up Permaculture or Sun and Bloom Farms or Lucian Toma, you will definitely find it. Thank you for attention, and I will see you soon.